The hot Afghan sun beat down on the dusty compound as the soldiers moved in silence, their rifles raised, boots crunching against gravel. Among them, one pair of eyes scanned more sharply than the rest, not human, but just as alert, just as brave. His name was Ranger, a Belgian Malinois with piercing eyes and nerves of steel. Ranger wasn't just a dog, he was a soldier, a trained K-9 unit with the US military. Ranger had been through more missions than many of the men in his unit. His job was to detect explosives, sweep buildings, and protect his partner, SGT Cole Walker. From the very first day they met, Cole knew there was something different about Ranger. He wasn't just smart, he was aware. He seemed to understand the weight of the mission, the tension in the air, the stakes behind every silent step. In a place where one wrong move could mean lives lost, Ranger's presence brought a strange sense of calm. They had been through firefights together, roadside bombs, long nights in the open desert. And through it all, Ranger never flinched. Once, during a patrol on the outskirts of Kandahar, Ranger stopped cold in front of a school building. Cole trusted him enough to halt the team's movement. Moments later, an IED was discovered, buried inches from the door. Ranger saved 6 lives that day. But heroism wasn't new to Ranger. He'd saved lives before. And with every mission, he only seemed to grow more focused, more determined. Soldiers began calling him the ghost dog, quiet, fast, almost invisible, yet always present when you needed him most. For Cole, Ranger was more than a fellow soldier. He was a brother. In a place where fear lurked behind every door, and loss was part of the job, Ranger was his anchor. During sleepless nights, Cole would sit with Ranger under the stars, one hand resting gently on his partner's back. The silence wasn't empty with Ranger. Their rit was peaceful. Then, during what was supposed to be a routine mission, everything changed. A blast ripped through the air. Cole didn't even hear it before he felt it: heat, pain, chaos. Shrapnel tore through his leg, and the world became a blur of sound and dust. When he came to, Ranger was there, nudging his shoulder, whimpering softly, his eyes wild with worry. Cole was airlifted out. His injuries meant he wouldn't return to active duty. And while he lay in a military hospital, Ranger continued serving. He too was honorably discharged months later. The military had a special program for dogs. Like Ranger, Adopt a Hero Dog, where handlers or their families could take these veterans home after service. It made sense that Ranger would go to Cole. They were bonded. They had survived together. Paperwork was filled, arrangements made. But because Cole was still recovering and attending physical therapy in Virginia, the military coordinated to send Ranger home, first to Cole's wife, Talia, and their son, Eli, in Oregon. Ranger was flown across the world, from the sands of Afghanistan to the green fields of the Pacific Northwest. The day he landed, he was calm, composed, his usual soldier self, but there was something in his eyes. He was looking for someone. He expected to see Cole, his human, his partner. Instead, he was greeted by a woman who smelled of unfamiliar perfume, and a boy who stood at a distance, arms crossed. Talia signed the paperwork with a polite smile, but her eyes didn't linger on Ranger for long. Eli barely looked at him at all. The car ride home was quiet. Ranger sat in the back seat, ears alert, posture straight, gaze focused out the window. He didn't know where he was, but he trusted the system. Trusted that he was going where Cole was. Going home. When they pulled into the driveway, he waited. Waited for Cole to step out from behind the door. Waited for the familiar voice, the familiar scent, the familiar touch. None of it came. Instead, he was led around to the backyard. The grass was overgrown. A chain-link fence bordered the property. There was a plastic water bowl half full. A doghouse stood in the corner, its roof slightly tilted. Talia clipped a leash to his collar, led him through the gate, and unhooked it. Then she turned and walked away. The gate clicked shut. Ranger sat. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just sat. Hours passed. The sky turned orange, then purple. Still no Cole. The night was colder than Ranger expected. He curled up in the doghouse, muscles tense, ears perked. Every creak, every gust of wind brought his head up, hopeful, but no one came. He didn't understand. He had served. He had saved lives. He had waited patiently. Where was his partner? Where was home? From behind the fence, the world felt quieter, more distant. Ranger didn't yet know that this backyard, this small patch of grass and shadow would become his prison. He didn't know that this wasn't a temporary stop. He didn't know that in the eyes of the people on the other side of the fence, his service was already forgotten. And as the stars came out, Ranger looked up at the sky, the same sky he used to watch beside Cole, and waited, because loyalty doesn't end with war. Loyalty waits. Even in silence. The small town of Ashwood, Oregon, sat quietly nestled between pine-covered hills and winding back roads. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches and front doors stayed unlocked. But for Ranger, this sleepy corner of the world was nothing like the sun-scorched terrain he'd left behind. It felt unfamiliar, not just in sight and scent, but in something deeper, something colder. After being left in the backyard that first night, Ranger remained where Talia had placed him. Day after day, he waited by the gate, ears flicking at the faintest sounds of movement. A car door slamming, the crunch of footsteps on gravel, a voice, any voice that might be his. But it never came. Inside the house, Cole Walker was still weeks away from returning. After the explosion in Kandahar left him with a damaged leg and a long road to rehabilitation, he had chosen to stay near a military rehab facility in Virginia. The plan was simple: get strong enough to come home, then reunite with Ranger. What he didn't know was that home was not ready for either of them. Talia hadn't wanted the dog. She had agreed. Reluctantly, after pressure from Cole and a stern call from the military adoption coordinator. "He's part of the family," Cole had said. "He saved my life." And though she had nodded on the other end of the phone, her tone had been distant. To her, Ranger was a reminder of war. Of the man who came home broken. Of the silence that had started creeping into their conversations. She didn't hate the dog, she just didn't know what to do with him. She wasn't cruel. She fed him, gave him water, hosed down the backyard when it smelled. But she didn't love him. She didn't see him. Eli, their 13-year-old son, had even less interest. He was too busy with his phone, his games, his music. Sometimes, he'd wander into the yard and throw a tennis ball half-heartedly, only to leave before Ranger could bring it back. Other times, he would stand at the edge of the porch, watching the dog with a strange mix of curiosity and resentment. He had heard stories of how his father used to laugh with Ranger, confide in him, trust him more than anyone else overseas. Maybe part of him was jealous. Whatever it was, Ranger felt it. Days turned to weeks. Rain came, and with it, cold nights. Ranger's once glossy coat grew dull. His eyes, once sharp and filled with purpose, dulled with waiting. Still, he remained loyal, alert for the voice he knew, the scent he trusted. The man who had once told him, "Where I go, you go." But Cole hadn't come. Not yet. Inside the house, life went on without Ranger. Talia worked long hours at a nearby care facility. Eli spent most of his time locked in his room, headphones in, barely acknowledging the dog that had once walked war zones for his father. No one took Ranger on walks. No one brushed his fur. No one said his name. The neighbors noticed, especially Travis Monroe, who lived next door. A retired firefighter with a soft spot for animals, Travis often sat on his back porch in the evenings, sipping coffee and listening to the world settle. From there, he had a clear view into the Walker's yard. At first, he figured the dog was just adjusting. New environments could be tough, even for a dog as trained as that. But as days passed, Travis began to worry. Ranger was always alone. He never left the yard. Even when it poured, he stayed curled in the far corner, tail wrapped tight. Eyes scanning the horizon. Travis began tossing over scraps, bits of chicken, leftover steak, and watched as Ranger accepted them silently, almost reverently, with a slow, respectful nod. It wasn't begging, it was gratitude. One evening, Travis called over the fence, "Hey buddy, where's your person?" Ranger perked up, his ears twitched. He rose, hopeful. But the voice wasn't the one he was waiting for. Still, he padded over to the fence, nose pressed between the chain links, tail wagging once, then still. That small moment stuck with Travis. He asked around, quietly. Learned that the dog belonged to Cole Walker, the local veteran who had been injured overseas. Hero dog, they said. Saved his whole unit once. But no one seemed to know why the dog was outside all the time, or why he looked so forgotten. Then, one afternoon, something shifted. It was subtle. The way Ranger flinched when Eli came into the yard. The way he lowered his head, tail tucked slightly, not fear, exactly, but unease. Travis didn't want to believe what his gut was telling him. But he knew animals. He knew when a dog felt safe, and when it didn't. Single quotes to. Travis began watching closer. Over the next week, he noticed Ranger limping slightly on one front leg. He noticed the food bowl going untouched for longer. And once, he thought he heard a sharp yelp in the early morning hours. Not loud, not prolonged, just enough to freeze the blood for a second. Something was wrong. But he didn't have proof, and besides, they were a military family. Who was he to question how they handled things? Still, that night, he couldn't sleep. Ranger's eyes, always waiting, always patient, haunted him. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Cole was packing his bags. He had completed his physical therapy. His leg was stronger. The limp was still there, but manageable. What kept him going, more than anything else, was the thought of seeing Ranger again. Of throwing a ball in the yard, of sitting on the porch in silence like they used to in the desert. He called Talia one last time before boarding his flight. "Is Ranger doing okay?" he asked. "He's fine," she replied quickly, settled in. Cole smiled. "Tell him I'm coming." But she did. Outside in the fading light of the backyard, Ranger lay beneath the porch steps, his eyes fixed on the back door. He didn't know it yet, but the man he'd been waiting for all this time was finally on his way home. What he also didn't know, couldn't have known, was that home wasn't the same, and neither was the love that once waited there. The moment the taxi pulled up in front of the house, Cole felt his pulse quicken. He hadn't been home in almost a year. So much had changed his body, his mind, the way he saw the world, but one thing had remained constant through it all. Ranger. The dog that had pulled him from the edge, time and time again. The dog that had stood between him and death, without hesitation. The thought of seeing Ranger again had been his light at the end of every tunnel. As the car rolled to a stop, Cole leaned toward the window, eyes scanning the yard. No sign of him. He stepped out, wincing slightly as his leg adjusted to the pressure. The driver offered to help with the bag, but Cole waved him off. He didn't care about the luggage. He cared about that one bark, that one sprint toward the gate, that one familiar sound that meant, "You're home." Silence. He walked up the driveway, past the porch, and glanced toward the backyard gate. It was closed, latched with a metal chain. Cole's brows furrowed. He turned the handle and stepped inside. There he was. But it wasn't the reunion he imagined. Ranger was lying near the fence line, head resting on his paws, unmoving. He looked thinner than Cole remembered. His fur was matted in places, dull, and uneven. And when he heard the gate creak, Ranger lifted his head slowly, cautiously, then stared. A long beat passed, then his eyes widened, recognition, and in an instant, he was on his feet, legs unsteady but moving fast, his body slammed against Cole's knees, tail wagging like it hadn't in months. A whine, high-pitched and broken, rose from his throat as if he was trying to speak, to explain, to say, "You came back. You really came back." Cole dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around Ranger's neck. "I'm here, buddy," he whispered. Voice thick. "I'm here now." But joy quickly gave way to concern. Ranger's ribs were visible under his coat. There was a patch of raw skin on his side. His nails were overgrown. And worst of all, his eyes, those bright, focused eyes that had once scanned minefields and read enemy movement, were now dimmed with exhaustion. "What happened to you?" Cole murmured, stroking the matted fur. Behind him, the back door creaked open. Talia's voice floated across the yard. He's been fine, she said. Takes a little getting used to, being home. Cole looked up. He's not fine. He's a military dog, she said, folding her arms. They don't exactly act like pets. Cole said nothing, but the pit in his stomach deepened. Over the next few days, he observed, quietly, carefully. Ranger's water bowl was often dry, his food cheap. Kibble that he barely touched was tossed into the metal dish like an afterthought. No toys, no leash. No walks, the gate remained locked. Even worse, there was something in Ranger's body language every time Eli entered the yard that sent alarm bells through Cole's mind. At first, it was subtle. A stiffening of the shoulders, ears pulling back slightly, the way he avoided looking at the boy directly. But then, one afternoon, Cole saw it clearly. Eli stepped out onto the porch. A PVC pipe in his handle left over from some home improvement project. Ranger immediately lowered himself to the ground. Not playfully. Not submissively. Cole stood at the kitchen window, frozen. Eli swung the pipe lazily through the air, tapping it against the railing, not hitting anything, but Ranger didn't move. He just stayed there, body pressed flat against the dirt, breathing hard. Later that evening, Cole found the pipe behind the doghouse, and beside Ranger's old deployment toy, a tattered bear with only one ear left. Something he hadn't seen since their base in Afghanistan. How had it ended up there? Cole sat with Ranger that night, his hand resting on the dog's back. Ranger leaned into the touch, like a drowning man reaching for a raft. No tail wag, no bark, just silence. Travis watched from his porch. He hadn't officially met Cole yet, but he recognized the change. There was movement in the Walker backyard, a real movement. The man was home, and with him, maybe hope. That night, Cole confronted Talia. He's not just a dog, he said quietly. You know that, right? Talia looked up from her. Phony's not my responsibility. He served just like I did. You were injured, she said, as if that explained everything. He wasn't. Cole stared at her, stunned. He saved my life. She didn't respond. Cole spent the next week sleeping on the couch, getting to know his own house again, getting to know Ranger all over. But the dog he had returned to wasn't the same. He flinched at loud noises. He wouldn't enter the house. And though he followed Cole with quiet loyalty, something inside him was broken. One night, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the sky. Ranger whimpered and crawled under the porch, body shaking. Cole grabbed a blanket and crawled in after him, laying beside his partner as the wind howled overhead. I left you behind, Cole whispered. I'm so sorry. Ranger pressed his head into Cole's chest and closed his eyes. But even in that quiet moment, Cole knew it wasn't enough. Healing wouldn't happen in this backyard. Not here. Not while the past still lingered in the shadows. Ranger needed more than reunion. He needed rescue. Days passed, but the air in the Walker household stayed thick with tension. Cole tried to re-establish a rhythm, something close to normal, but the weight of what Ranger had endured didn't loosen its grip. The truth was there, quietly staring, pinned down etched in the dog's withdrawn behavior. In the way Ranger never wagged his tail unless Cole touched him first. In the way he flinched from Eli's footsteps. Cole kept a journal during those weeks. Not out of habit, but out of necessity. He wrote down every odd reaction, every moment of stillness, every time Ranger looked toward the house with hesitation instead of joy. March 14th, refused to come inside again. Talia says it's because he's trained to be outside, but he looked at the door like it would hurt him. March 17th, Eli left his backpack by the back door. Ranger growled low. Not like the Ranger I know. It was a warning, not to Eli. To me, Cole knew trauma when he saw it. He'd seen it in the mirror too many mornings to count. And Ranger. He wasn't just adjusting to civilian life, he was reacting. Retreating. The damage wasn't from war, it had happened after. One afternoon, Cole decided to check something. He waited until Talia and Eli left for groceries. Then he walked into the laundry room. At first, it looked like any other utility space: washer, dryer, detergent bottles lined up neatly. But behind the door, against the far wall, was something that made his stomach tighten. An old wire crate, Ranger's crate. The metal was rusted at the hinges. No bedding inside, no blanket. The floor was scratched raw, the edges chewed. There were claw marks deep ones along the lower back panel. Evidence of panic, of desperation. A faint odor lingered. Urine, feces. Fear. Cole backed away slowly. Later, that night, he asked Talia, why was his crate in the laundry room? She didn't even blink. It's where we kept him when we were out, or when he barked too much. Cole stared at her. He barked because he needed something. Talia shrugged. He's a dog, he'll get over it. That was the moment Cole realized something final. She didn't understand. Not what Ranger meant to him, not what service dogs endured overseas, and definitely not what kind of betrayal it was to treat a war hero like trash. But worse than that, she didn't care. That night, Cole sat outside with Ranger, the wind sharp but not cold. He pulled his coat tighter and reached for the dog's paw. You deserved better, he said quietly. And I should have known sooner. Ranger's eyes blinked slowly, then closed as he leaned into Cole's shoulder. Across the fence, Travis had been watching. From his porch, he'd witnessed the silence. The bruised rhythm of that house. The absence of joy. And he saw something shift in Cole's stillness, turning into purpose. The next morning, Cole knocked on his neighbor's door. You've been out there a lot, Cole said. Travis nodded. So have you. You ever notice anything strange? Before I came back, Travis stepped outside, letting the screen door swing shut behind him. Yeah, he said. A lot, actually. And then he talked. Slowly at first, then with more certainty. About how he used to hear Ranger barking at all hours. About how Eli once bragged about keeping the dog in check. About how he'd seen bruises on Ranger's side, marks that weren't from play or accident. Travis lowered his voice. I thought about calling someone. Cole's jaw tensed. Why didn't you? I didn't have proof. And Talia, she's charming when she wants to be. Folks don't expect a nice-looking nurse with a polite son to be the problem. Cole sighed. Yeah, I get that. But you're here now, Travis said. And that dog. He's finally got someone in his corner again. That night, Cole made his decision. He didn't confront Talia. He didn't rage, accuse, or argue. He simply packed his duffel bag, grabbed Ranger's leash, and walked out the door. No goodbye, just gone. They checked into a small motel just outside town. The room was cramped, but clean. Ranger sniffed every corner cautiously before curling up on the bed. Cole didn't even stop him. You've earned this, he whispered. For the first time since Cole returned, Ranger slept through the night. No pacing, no whimpering, just peace. In the morning, Cole called a therapist, one that specialized in PTSD for both veterans and service dogs. He booked a session for himself and an evaluation for Ranger. Then, he called a lawyer. Because what happened to Ranger wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. Later that week, after a brief visit to the vet, the diagnosis was clear. Malnourishment, muscle loss, untreated wounds. Psychological distress, consistent with prolonged isolation and abuse. The vet didn't mince words. This dog saved lives, she said, and someone locked him in a box like he was garbage. Cole nodded, jaw clenched. Not anymore. And that's when something shifted in Ranger, too. Slowly, cautiously, but unmistakably. His eyes started to soften. He followed Cole more closely now, tail twitching slightly at the sound of his name. He began to trust again. But the journey wasn't over. There were calls to make, testimonies to gather, and justice to demand. Because silence might hide things, but it doesn't erase them. And for Ranger, the noise of war had faded, but the quiet betrayal at home was even louder. And now, it was time to speak up. The motel room's alarm buzzed at 7 a.m., but Cole had been awake for hours. His mind was fixed on the day ahead, the calls, the documents, The battle for justice that wasn't fought with rifles, but with truth. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Ranger lay beside him, still asleep. His body curled in a tight circle, but his breathing was deeper now, more relaxed. The tension that once lined his muscles had begun to soften. The therapy sessions were helping, slowly peeling away the invisible bruises left by betrayal. Cole quietly stepped outside, inhaling the morning air. It was crisp, but clean, unlike the air back at the house, where silence was suffocating and kindness felt like an inconvenience. This morning, Cole wasn't going back to that life. He was going forward. The first stop was the local animal welfare office. Cole had called ahead, speaking with a woman named Claire, who had sounded shocked and deeply concerned upon hearing Ranger's history. When he walked through the doors with Ranger at his side, Claire stood to greet them. She didn't hesitate. "This is the one." Cole nodded. Claire knelt down, letting Ranger sniff her hand. "Hey there, hero," she said softly. "You've been through a war, haven't you?" Her eyes welled up. She stood and motioned for Cole to follow her to a private office. There, he shared the full story: deployment, Ranger service, the discharge, the adoption, and the neglect. He laid it all out. Photos of the crate, veterinary reports, notes from the PTSD specialist, and even a statement from Travis, his neighbor. Everything was methodical, thorough. Claire looked over the evidence slowly, then gave a long sigh. "I've seen a lot," she said, "but this is heartbreaking." Cole didn't respond. His jaw was tight. Rage was a familiar weight in his chest, but he couldn't afford to let it lead the charge. This had to be done the right way. For Ranger. Claire leaned forward. "We can open a case, but because of Ranger's status as a former military K-9, I recommend you also speak with a federal animal rights attorney. This may go beyond local cruelty laws." Cole nodded. "I'm already in contact with one." He wasn't taking chances. A week earlier, he'd reached out to a non-profit specializing in veteran canine welfare. They connected him with an attorney named Michael Grayson, who agreed to represent Ranger's case pro bono. When Cole met with Michael later that afternoon, the lawyer didn't waste time. He'd already reviewed the documentation Cole had sent. "This isn't just negligence," Michael said. "This is abuse of a federal service animal. Under the Service Dog Protection Act, we're talking serious charges." Cole looked down at Ranger, who sat quietly beside him, his head resting on Cole's boot. "He trusted them," Cole said quietly, "and they left him to rot." Michael's voice hardened. "Then we won't let them hide behind polite smiles and tidy lawns. They don't get to walk away." The plan was clear. File a formal complaint with the county. Submit federal reports documenting abuse of a former military K-9. And simultaneously begin a civil suit for damages and violation of adoption terms. Because Ranger didn't just belong to a family, he belonged to a legacy. And that legacy demanded justice. The legal wheels turned slowly. News of the case began to circulate in the veteran community. Messages poured in from soldiers who had served with K-9 units, from families who had adopted service dogs and treated them as kin, from strangers who simply couldn't believe such cruelty had gone unnoticed. One of the letters stood out to Cole. It was from a retired Army sergeant in Oklahoma. "I remember Ranger from Kandahar. That dog saved lives, mine included. Tell him I said thank you, and tell him he's not alone." Cole read it twice, then folded it and placed it in his pocket. He didn't need motivation. But reminders like that, they added fuel to a fire that was already burning. Meanwhile, Ranger's transformation was becoming impossible to ignore. With therapy, vet care, and most of all love, he was beginning to resemble the dog Cole had once served beside. He wagged his tail now. He played fetch, cautiously at first, then with full, bounding strides. He slept soundly. He ate well. He made eye contact. Healing didn't erase the past, but it did whisper a new truth. "You are safe now." One day, while they were walking through a quiet park, a small boy ran up to them. He couldn't have been more than 7. "Is he a soldier dog?" the boy asked. Wide-eyed. Cole smiled. "He was. One of the best. The boy knelt down. "Thank you, sir," he said, not to Cole, but to Ranger. And Ranger, without hesitation, leaned forward and licked the boy's hand. By month's end, the lawsuit had been officially filed. Cole was scheduled to appear in court with Ranger by his side. The evidence was undeniable. The emotional damage was irrefutable. And the legal support was mounting. Talia and Eli had both been served notices. Eli was being evaluated by juvenile authorities, and Talia's work in healthcare had come under review due to concerns of neglect. Her world, once so neatly arranged, was beginning to unravel. Cole didn't relish it. He didn't want revenge. What he wanted was something much simpler. Accountability. Because people needed to understand that dogs like Ranger weren't toys. They weren't burdens. They weren't disposable. They were heroes, and heroes deserved more than a backyard and an empty food bowl. They deserved honor. As the court date drew closer, media outlets started picking up the story. News crews requested interviews. Some even offered money for exclusive rights. Cole declined. "This isn't about fame," he told one persistent reporter. "It's about respect." And that's how it stayed. Quiet, focused, dignified, just like Ranger. But the truth had a way of rippling outward. Viewers who saw Ranger's photos, that noble face, those tired eyes, couldn't look away. They couldn't forget, and they shouldn't, because the wounds of war didn't always bleed. Sometimes, they came in the form of silence, of abandonment, of a forgotten hero lying alone in a cold crate. But not anymore now. Ranger was seen. Now, he was heard. And soon, he would be vindicated. The courthouse was quiet that morning, blanketed in a soft fog. A few people milled about the front steps, some holding coffee, others glancing at their phones. But all of them turned when Cole arrived. He didn't come alone. Ranger walked calmly, beside him, his stride even, and his head high. His coat had regained its sheen, his frame had filled out, and his eyes, once dulled by sadness, now held something steady and strong. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was reclaiming his dignity. They walked through the courthouse doors like soldiers returning from the battlefield. Cole wore a suit. Ranger wore a simple service vest with one patch stitched over his heart, still serving. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. On one side sat Talia and Eli, both flanked by attorneys. Talia looked tight-lipped and nervous, and Eli avoided everyone's gaze. The boy who once threatened to break every bone in a dog's body now looked more like a child cornered by consequence. Cole took a seat across from them, with Ranger lying at his feet. The judge entered shortly after, a serious woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She called the session to order. What followed was a testimony, not of bitterness, but of truth. Cole spoke first, calm, direct, and without embellishment. He shared Ranger's story from the day they met overseas, to the moment he found him locked away, forgotten, in a dark laundry room. He showed pictures. He submitted medical records. He read excerpts from vet reports and the evaluations from Ranger's trauma specialist. He didn't ask to serve, Cole said, voice steady. He didn't ask to be dropped into the middle of a war, but he did it, bravely, every day. And all he asked for in giving everything was a home. He paused, looked down at Ranger. And what he got instead was silence, neglect, abandonment. He turned back to the judge. "We don't do that to heroes. Not the ones with boots, and not the ones with paws." There was a silence in the room that hung like a held breath. Then, Claire, the woman from the animal welfare office, she confirmed Ranger's condition at the time of rescue and the clear signs of long-term emotional trauma. She also shared the adoption agreement Talia had signed, one that explicitly required humane care and regular checkups, none of which, she stated, had been honored. Lastly, Michael Grayson, the federal attorney, spoke to the broader legal violations. He outlined the protections granted to former military animals and detailed how this case could set precedent for future enforcement. "This is about more than one dog," he concluded. "This is about every service animal we've entrusted to civilian care. If we don't stand up for Ranger, We send the message that their sacrifices are disposable. Talia's defense was weak at best. She claimed she'd been overwhelmed, and that Eli had struggled to bond with the dog. She insisted she didn't realize the crate was harmful, and that she hadn't noticed Ranger losing weight. "I'm not a bad person," she said through tears. "I was just doing my best." But the courtroom didn't seem convinced. Especially not when Eli was asked to speak. He shuffled forward, eyes fixed on the floor. His voice was barely audible. "I didn't like the dog, he messed stuff up." He growled once. He hesitated, then admitted, "Yeah, I hit him. I guess I was angry. I didn't think it mattered." The judge studied him carefully, her hands folded on the bench. She didn't scold or shout. Her silence was louder than any reprimand. Then she gave her ruling. The court found Talia and Eli guilty of animal cruelty, negligence, and violation of the adoption contract. Eli, due to his age, was placed in a mandatory juvenile rehabilitation program focused on empathy and animal care education. Talia lost her license to work in healthcare, pending further review, and was fined heavily. But more importantly, Ranger's ownership was permanently transferred to Cole. No more shared rights, no more legal limbo. He was home, legally and irrevocably. The judge added one final note to the record. This animal served his country with more loyalty than many humans serve each other. Let today be a reminder that our duty to our veterans on two legs or forward does not end when the uniform comes off. Cole didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply leaned down, wrapped his arm around Ranger's neck, and whispered, "You did it, bud. You're free." Ranger wagged his tail gently, the courtroom light catching the amber in his eyes. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a survivor, a soldier, a hero. In the days that followed, the story spread. It was picked up by local news, then national. Headlines read, "Forgotten War Dog Finds Justice Veteran Qasim Balan's Abuser Held Accountable in Landmark Case, From Combat to Courtroom." A hero's journey. Cole was inundated with messages, some from veterans, others from everyday Americans, who had never served but felt deeply moved. Donations poured into veteran canine programs. Shelters reported spikes in interest from families looking to adopt retired service dogs. Ranger's face appeared on posters, websites, even murals. He had become a symbol not of tragedy, but of triumph. Months later, Cole and Ranger sat by a quiet lake. The sun was setting, casting the water in gold. Ranger lay with his head in Cole's lap, completely at peace. A child ran past them, stopped, and pointed. "Is that the hero dog?" Cole smiled. "Yeah," he said, "that's him." The boy ran back to his mother, giddy. Cole looked down at Ranger. "You're not forgotten anymore," he whispered. Ranger lifted his head, nudged Cole's hand once, then settled back into the grass. Final message for viewers. To all who watched Ranger's story unfold, thank you. His journey is one of many, but with every voice that speaks up, every person who chooses kindness over cruelty, we inch closer to a world where no hero is left behind, because some wear tags, others wear collars, but all of them deserve to come home, never forgotten, never alone.